Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast, where we dive deep into cinema and industry topics so you can decide for yourself if they're your cup of tea. Ready for a deep look with a deep brew? Today, our reaction to the Odyssey. I'm your host, Brandon Chasen, and I'm here with my brother Chris, my mother Reba, and my father Terry. We got the privilege of being able to fly out of town, visit Chris in LA for a change, and since we were all together, it was perfect timing for us to check out the Odyssey. So it was great. We got to watch it as a family. I thought we should share our review on the movie itself and how we took to it after having a chance to finally take it in.
Well, the first thing that hit me when we went into the theater, which, by the way, we saw it on what they call the premium screen, which my understanding of that was it was obviously not IMAX, but something close to it. And instead, it just seemed like this really big square. But that was fine with me, honestly, even though I know the film was shot entirely with IMAX cameras. It was fine with me that I didn't see the movie in IMAX, because it was a big enough screen for me to, appreciate just the magnitude of this project. The next thing that struck me was, so we saw it late afternoon. And so I guess the next thing that struck me was how empty the theater was. And I'm not saying obviously we weren't the only ones in there, but I'd say the theater was 20% full. And this was not necessarily a large theater, the one we were in anyway. It was not necessarily a large theater, but it was only 20% full. And I just found it interesting considering how long this film had been promoted, just how much buzz there had been about this movie, and just how positive the reviews had been of this film to that point. And the reviews made it seem as if people were clamoring to the theaters for this film. So I was just very surprised that the theater wasn't packed. And then lastly, I was really, really pleased with the opening of the movie, because it was consistent with Homer's poem, and that it opened with his son. I like that it began with his son and what his son and his mom were enduring while they were waiting or hoping for his father to return. And so I was really pleased with that it looked like this was going to be consistent with the full story.
Along the lines of what you were saying about the format, I really wanted to see it in IMAX, and I hopefully will go and we'll see it on an IMAX screen. I was unsure of what the premium large format was, and it sounds like it's a more generic classification of film screens than IMAX. IMAX is a particular, I guess you call it a subtype of premium large format. Premium large format is just big. And so that leaves a lot of variation. One thing I thought was maybe the size of the room that we were in sort of had an impact on that, because usually in an IMAX theater, there are fewer seats and you seem closer to the screen generally. So the screen obviously seems even larger because of, your relationship to the screen itself. In this one, the room seemed so big that although it was a very large screen, it didn't have the same impact to me as being in an IMAX theater. So that was one thing. The other is, I like the storytelling and the characters. I thought in that respect, Christopher Nolan did a really good job of doing that. As you said, they started off with a different perspective, not just going directly to Odysseus, but taking the perspective of his son and his wife and starting there with it. So yeah, I thought that was pretty good.
I agree with Mom's take on the movie. The fact that it I don't know if it centered the wife and son, but it made sure to make sure that they were a priority and kind of showed the whole, that old saying, when the cat's away, the mice will play. That they were carrying on in a way, that she and Telemachus had to deal with people carrying on in a way that Odysseus wouldn't have tolerated, and that they wouldn't have behaved if he were there. I did like that element of it, and and I did think it made sense to start off with that. What I will say is, I generally am kind of a sucker for nonlinear storytelling, but I also felt like, and I've read this in some Letterboxd reviews, it didn't allow you to sit in some of the bigger moments, particularly with the Trojan horse. So Menelaus, describing that scene, and they show it, but it's very brief. That they, they kind of cut it in a very intense moment. They just cut back to them eating dinner and him sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
And I particularly didn't like that approach to that sequence. Mm-hmm. I also wasn't a big fan of the way they handled the sirens, and these are spoilers, but I felt the approach he took in terms of the sound of that scene I didn't particularly like, and not actually displaying the sirens themselves. So I thought in general that there were visceral moments that we were a little bit robbed of, and I generally like the creatures and the fantasy part of Greek mythology, and I felt like he could have leaned into it more than he did. Mm-hmm. So those are my gripes with it. I do think it was good storytelling and interesting that he prioritized people that these books don't always prioritize.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna first state that anybody that struggles to work with a production that moves slowly, this is probably going to be a harder thing for them to enjoy initially, unless they've already read the poem, and then they probably will have the patience to get through it all. But young kids will struggle with this because it's a slow-moving movie, a really slow-moving movie for their liking. But the acting in it was absolutely amazing. I thought everybody did a wonderful job with every role that was given to them, whether it was big or small. I thought they did an excellent job. Yeah. Particularly and it's going to pain me to say this a little bit, but Robert Pattinson was a very wonderful antagonist.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he was.
He was awesome in that role. And for me, in some ways, it kind of was fitting because I've been tired of seeing him as being a heartthrob in any production. So I kind of enjoyed the fact that he was a less attractive personality this time around. But yeah, I thought everybody did an excellent job acting. Chris, I had opposite feeling about the siren scene than you. I thought it was an interesting take to not have us take it in the way that everybody else has, because I think it does a good job of speaking to the anticipation of the sirens, as well as saying why there's so much caution against listening and all that kind of stuff. So I felt it gave us another take on the right way to handle them, while also the reason why, what damage can be done by the sirens without having to gaze upon them and hear their song. So I personally like that piece. John Bernthal, to his point, like Menelaus, that he's not in for a ginormous portion of the movie, but I think for me, he was one of my favorite characters just because I love the way they handled that relationship that he had with Telemachus. So, yeah, it was good. Overall, though, I think I'm going to see it again at some point, maybe even soon, because, Dad, you're talking about wanting to see it on IMAX, and maybe I'll try and go and see it with you. But what I want to do first, I want to watch Troy. I know none of the actors are the same, but I wonder if I will enjoy it even more watching the precipitous action, the preceding, war, and then seeing the fallout afterwards. Yes, I'm probably signing myself up for 28 days of film because of how long both stories are, but it's still, I have a feeling I'm going to enjoy it because it's going to be like, hey, I watched what led to the Trojan War. I watched the whole Trojan War, and then I see the fallout for afterwards. So I think that's how I want to take it in. So whenever you and I can try and schedule that, Dad, maybe I'll do that, in anticipation of watching this again, that I'll do that first.
Real quick, it's funny, on IMDb, they have the writers listed for the Odyssey as Christopher Nolan and Homer.
That's pretty funny.
I wonder how much they talked.
Yeah. Well, I will go with, I agree with Chris in terms of, it would have been nice to see the sirens, considering this was a supposedly an epic movie. I was disappointed with the amount of action in it, and to me that would have added to that. I expected more compelling scenes, and that would have been one thing that would have added to that, seeing the sirens. I did enjoy the choice of actors, although I know there are some people that had issue with the choice of people to portray roles in something that's fictional. So there's no such thing as historical accuracy in a work of fiction. So I'll just put that out there. I would have liked to have seen more interaction or speaking with the Cyclops. You know, that was a scene that they did put a little more footage into it with that, but maybe speaking to it when they learn.
Don't give too much.
Speaking to it. And a spoiler, sorry, I can't avoid this one, is why did he herd sheep? You know, there were some questions as far as that's concerned. But generally speaking, I thought that some of the scenes could have been a little more compelling. Overall, I enjoyed the movie, but adding the sirens might have added to that grandiose part of it that I was looking for.
Yeah, I agree with all of you. Overall, I enjoyed the movie. It was an incredible presentation. What a feat. Let me just say, Brandon, I agree with you 100% about the acting. I thought it was incredible. John Leguizamo just did an amazing job in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yes, he did.
just an amazing job in this movie. And I hope he's nominated for an Oscar for this role. I thought he was just incredible. I've seen him in a number of things, and it's amazing what he did in this film. So I thought the casting was just great in this film. With regard to the sirens, Chris, I agree with you. I think Christopher Nolan cheated us with the sirens, but I also feel I can't help but feel it was a budget decision, even though my understanding is the film was about $250 million. Yeah. And I tend to think they were just up against it, and he thought this was a way to get around that. I truly think it was a budget decision. Not that that's helpful to the audience, but I think we were cheated on the sirens. I think we were cheated on the whirlpool. I think we were cheated in the way you mentioned, Terry, around Cyclops. I particularly, though, in this film, I thought the climax was incredible. I thought the action in the climax was really, really good.
I just want to circle this back to something you said at the beginning about the theater. Remember, we went on the day before the actual release date to see it, so that may explain some of why there were fewer people in the theater on that particular day, because it had a pretty big opening weekend.
Yeah, it's actually his highest grossing opening weekend for any movie he's released.
Yeah.
Additionally, Mom, we were fortunate enough to be on vacation, but to Dad's point, we went on a Thursday during, the end of working hours. So that may also have contributed to why the theater wasn't as packed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll get back to that in a second. To your point, Mom, I think you might have a point about the budget limitations, just because this was the first feature shot entirely with IMAX cameras. Mm-hmm. And usually they've been used kind of sparingly or sporadically throughout productions, and this is the first feature ever shot entirely with IMAX cameras. And so I wonder how much that increased the budget, and if that, I'm assuming that was intentional. Christopher Nolan's probably going to look up and go, "Oh no, I shot all these scenes with an IMAX camera. Dang, I wasn't even keeping track." So I think he wanted this to be the first film to do that, and maybe to that point he cut certain things out or made certain decisions, framed things in certain ways to account for that. And so I wanted to throw that in there. And back to your points about the theater attendance, the Variety article you shared mentioned, that there were 2 a.m. and 7 a.m. screenings of it, and the Variety, the writer, jokingly wrote deranged people, and I thought it was funny, but I also think, some people are on a different schedule, and some people still
That's a
you
fair
know,
point.
have a fervor to see. I at one point was working a job where I got off at 1:30 in the morning. So, you know, if I was just an avid fan who wanted to be the first to see this, because a lot of people do want to be the first one in line to see it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think, you know, that it accounted for people who had different schedules or some kind of extenuating circumstance. And I think, you know, when you're a filmmaker who's known for making events out of their movies and for making very grandiose productions, it kind of makes sense that they allowed for that. And obviously he's aiming for the biggest opening weekend he can get. So, and I'm not saying he scheduled these necessarily himself, but it makes sense that theaters would do that. To me anyway, it makes sense that theaters would do that. And so that there could be a number of different reasons that our particular screening was a little more empty, but overall though, I think it did well in part because of that.
Bro, I love what you just said there about the movie release times and everything, because I am one of those ridiculous people that loves to be at the theater if there are midnight releases. I've seen several midnight releases, and the only reason why I don't do it as frequently now is because I have kids and they're relentless when they wake up, so I would need that rest over the indulgence of a midnight release. But when they are all able to take care of themselves and let me go back to being me, I will be back at the theater for the earliest release possible. That being said, I also agree that I think it's a good thing for theaters to do that. As an aside, people have different work schedules. And so I love the idea that maybe they have overnight hours for certain releases. I do want to make note, bro. You mentioned how this was the first feature film done all on IMAX. There's a distinction. This was done on IMAX film, and the Marvel fanatics will come at you because Marvel did the first productions with Infinity War and Endgame, doing it all IMAX digital, the entirety of those films. So just so that there's some clarity on that, this is the first time it was done on film.
Well, just to stay with this for a minute, with regard to there being, you know, these midnight hour showings at the theaters. Chris, you mentioned you know it's great that the theaters accommodated people who perhaps, you know, had different schedules, and so it's great that the theaters accommodated people. Because they, you know, perhaps they did want to see the film, and that was the best time for them to see it. See, I don't think the theaters were thinking necessarily about the people so much as they ran out of tickets. Because my understanding is there's, based on the Variety article, there's only 41 theaters that have IMAX screens. That is quite limited. And so what I think the theaters were thinking, though, is that, you know, they ran out of tickets in advance because these tickets they've been selling these tickets for a year now. And I think they ran out of tickets and said, you know what, why don't we just put them out? We'll just put them out there at midnight and see if it couldn't hurt. And those tickets happen to sell. But I don't think it's that they were thinking about the people. I think they were thinking about
having more available.
Yeah, I think they were thinking about themselves and not the people. Not that matters. Well, it does matter to me, but but anyway, I think it does give you perspective to realize that there's only 41 IMAX theaters. So according to that article, apparently it is quite expensive.
Getting back to the movie, though, I do think that, you know, there was the negative reception surrounding the movie was about inconsistencies relative to the poem. Some people said the costuming was off. Some people said the design of the ships was different than described. You know, that they were more like Viking ships. And so I think there weren't basically the hubbub about inaccuracies or inconsistencies. Wasn't just related to the casting. There was some about, you know, other elements of it. You know, I pulled a couple of Letterboxd reviews that I thought kind of illustrated certain consistent negative criticisms of the movie. There's one that was a positive review that I'll read the username was Syed M. Jubair. I'm not sure if I'm Jubair. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but the last line, what he said anyway, was, while the movie cannot be called a good adaptation of Homer, it is an excellent movie on its own, and maybe the only high budget Odyssey movie we get in the coming decades. The more negative reviews I saw, one from I'm Gigi Honyak, said that there were two interesting moments, the Trojan War bits and the Hades bits, but we don't get a chance to sit with them or consider them with any nuance. It's a 3-hour movie and there's still somehow no time to sit and think. And then they criticize the siren scene. It said, "Show me the siren song. Don't tell me how great it is. Why am I watching your movie if you can't show me a story?" And then another review said, from Rustled Doodler, said basically that Scylla, a monster who is intricately described in the original story, is just swept away as fast as possible. The savage giants are suddenly wearing armor and have battle techniques on par with soldiers, ? I cannot see Matt Damon as Odysseus because he is just too... Okay, well, I'll leave that part out. The fact it's the Bronze Age, but nobody's wearing bronze. Why did they have to utilize Viking ships instead of an actual Greek ship? There are an endless buffet of changes which just confuse me endlessly. And so, I mean, so those are, to be fair, some of the criticisms that it seemed like were consistent among the most negative reviews of the movie, were that they just didn't find it that consistent with the poem. And we discussed that in our review before, which was, do you feel like these types of movies need to be consistent with the source material, or is it fine if they deviate?
Yeah, I'm perfectly fine with them deviating. Yes, it's a visual adaptation, but in every instance, I feel like when we're given exactly what the text says, we're bored because we already know that piece. We saw it in our heads. I think you need to give them the space and creative license to do their interpretation of it for us to see something different, as opposed to seeing exactly verbatim what was written down.
But to what degree, though? To what degree? I mean,
there's certain things that
the
I like
idea
about
of it
that
being
criticism.
Bronze Age and not being bronze,
right?
That is kind of an interesting.
I agree. That's what I was about to say. There are certain things that I think are legitimate. Like, to that person's point, yeah, there's no excuse there. We know it's the Bronze Age. Why didn't you put bronze on these people? Hell, at least bronze paint. Like, they didn't even do that. So yeah. I think that is actually a very that's an intelligent and legitimate critique of it. It's like, yo, do better.
Yeah, I will stay consistent with what I've said throughout the discussions where we've talked about this, in that I'm okay with deviating in terms of whatever you're doing in an adaptation of some work, as long as the essence of it is maintained. It does not bother me in one iota. But having said that, I agree with some of the criticisms of, well, you just didn't have anything you could paint bronze. What? Yeah.
Yep.
But to circle back to the whole 70 millimeter screen thing, the Variety article says there are a total of 41 in the world. That's a worldwide
number.
We
go.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and to be fair, that there are other versions of the movie, standard, etc., but the way it was shot originally, and it seems, according to the article and my own take on it, people wanted to see it in that format. So if you want to see it in that format, to your point, it's very limited.
Be prepared to travel.
Yeah.
Be prepared to travel. The other thing to point out too is, I know we've had a podcast about this, not to belabor this, but we had a podcast about this some time ago, about how does a director, how does a filmmaker want us to see their film? There's how we want to see it, but how does the filmmaker want you to see the film that they produced? And this is one case where, and they talked about this a bit in the Variety article as well, but I know we talked about it extensively in a podcast a while ago. And Christopher Nolan, my understanding, and I think the Variety article conveyed this as well, and Christopher Nolan, I'm sure, talked about this during his 60 Minutes interview,
He did.
that there is a way that he wants the audience to experience the Odyssey. And so he wants us to see it in IMAX, which is why they spent the $250 million to shoot the entire thing in IMAX. So,
there's the IMAX part, and then what he said in the 60 Minutes interview was that he wants the audience to experience the film from the perspective of the characters. He was adamant about that in all of his films, is that the vantage point is that of the characters.
So I find that quite relevant here, is if we're limited in terms of the number of theaters that show the film in this way, then how many people are really going to experience this film in a way that the filmmaker wanted us to experience it? And so not many. And even now, if you look at where the film is now, you look at the screens it's on now, it's not playing on a lot of IMAX screens. And we're in the Chicago area, which is a major area for this, just as Los Angeles is. There's not a lot of IMAX screens here in the Chicago area.
For the film format, not the digital.
I think in regards to this, the real distinction is, I think IMAX is standard just because the screen dimensions, there's been some, articles and posts circulating about the difference in in what people who went to a standard screening and an IMAX screening saw in terms of, so I really think screen dimension is the big focus as opposed to film and digital. But to that point, Christopher Nolan discussing how he wants everybody to see this in IMAX, but I just wonder if there's a disconnect a little bit in terms of he can see anything in IMAX anytime he wants, and I would imagine a lot of the people he associates with probably have the ability to see it in IMAX anytime they want, and whether it's a personal budget restriction or the actual accessibility to an IMAX theater, I don't know if that's realistic for everybody. The way it's probably not even a thought for him, I wonder.
Which is problematic, don't you think? I mean, again, to your point, looking at the studio side, the business side of this, didn't they consider the limited number of screens available worldwide to show this film? So they're spending $250 million on this film to shoot it all, shoot it on IMAX film. Didn't they consider the limited number of screens that they could project this film on before and I mean, he wants everybody to see it that way, but realistically, everybody can't see it that way. You're going to get...
They're not... I don't think that's... Yes.
It should have been a consideration, is my point.
No.
I disagree.
Well, the part that you're missing is that is the intended way of seeing it. However, like everything else, it is on standard screens all over the freaking place. And people are going to see it wherever they can.
I agree, but we just talked about how filmmakers want the audience to experience the films they make the way they want them to experience them.
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan said explicitly how he wants the audience to experience this film.
Right.
They spent all of this money doing this on IMAX film, using these heavy cameras to doing this on IMAX film because he wanted the audience to experience the film in IMAX.
And I would want to see it that
film.
way.
Wait, no, let me finish. It's how he wanted us to see it.
Mm-hmm.
If that's how he wanted us to see it, and they were willing to invest in that, they needed to also invest in expanding the technology of the theaters so that we could, more people could see it that way. Instead, they didn't do that, and that's
me. I don't.
Because it's almost like saying I think everybody. It's like saying I think everybody should see this movie on Air Force One. It's like, well, damn, dude, we're not. You know what I mean? But part of me wonders. I'm like, was this a little tone deaf statement, or was this a marketing gimmick on his part? In a
little
sense,
bit of both,
like,
in my opinion.
hey, this movie's so dang unbelievable. I think everyone should see it on IMAX, and then we're all going, oh, dang, maybe I should go run to the IMAX to go see, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
As this,
Yeah.
and obviously the ticket price isn't quite the same. So
Right.
he's
Generous way of thinking that.
he's doing the, you know, the studio and the movie theaters themselves a favor, telling everybody, because everybody's, if it makes no difference to you, you're gonna be like, oh, I should go see it on IMAX now, right? So,
yeah.
So it could be
interesting.
a little tone deaf. It could also just be a marketing gimmick. Because personally, I feel like the controversy over the casting was hyped up. I feel like that was a little. I'm not saying people don't think that way, but I am saying I think it was played up to help generate buzz about the movie.
Yeah.
So the topic of the IMAX film, and I agree with you, bro, in a lot of ways. I think that the message was a bit tone deaf. Now, naturally, and I do agree with you, in partnership with the theaters, he's pushing the idea of going to IMAX to everybody. Let's not forget, they spent, like you said, $250 million on it, and as long as 10 people go see this on IMAX, he gets the whole money back on that one viewing. That's how dang high the ticket prices are. Obviously, I say that a little bit exaggerated. It's more like 20 seats. But anyways, the point being is that, yes, that ticket price is astronomically more expensive than a regular ticket. However, I do think his overarching point of it, though, was like, yes, go see it the way it was shot. But overall, he wants the audience to have this feeling when they go see it, no matter which formatted screen they go to.
Yeah, I agree with the whole. I tend towards the latter about the marketing part of it. But as I've stated a number of times in podcasts, this is exactly the type of movie that I would want to go to see on an IMAX screen. So it is what it is in terms of the material. So the fact that it was shot in IMAX for me is like, yeah, I'm going to see it in IMAX.
I agree with that. I mean, it's a sensible statement in its own right. Like if I saw the invite last night, if you know, Olivia Wilde and Seth Rogen had come out and said, I want everybody to see this in IMAX, I'd have been like, yeah, give me a break. I'm going to see it on the standard screen. So it's a sensible statement in its own right.
I just hope that the next production that Christopher Nolan does, he does it all on IMAX. I want it to be a futuristic film, and I want everybody
IMAX
to be
what?
dressed.
IMAX what?
I want it shot on IMAX film.
Thanks.
Okay? I want him to shoot it on IMAX film. I want it to be a futuristic production, and I want everybody to be dressed as if it's the Bronze Age. That's what I want.
To be fair,
yeah,
though,
you know, I wish we had if we'd have gone to see like a midnight showing or something. It would have been funny to see somebody walk in wearing, you know, some goofy armor or something like that. I don't know if it had the kind of fandom Star Wars had, but it would have been funny to see somebody walking in looking like that.
It would have been interesting for Abella, though.
Stormtroopers.
It would have been more interesting for Abella.
Yeah.
Well, she's,
What do you mean I can't bring a sword into the theater?
Take it up with Agamemnon.
the prospect that we were going to watch it again on IMAX to her was like, oh, no, no. To your point, Brandon, it is long. It's I don't see a kid getting through that film.
Thanks so much for listening to the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. Be sure to follow the show so you don't miss the next episode. You can stay in the loop on all things COTC by subscribing on our website at cupofteacritiques.com. Find us on TikTok and Letterboxd as well. For Reba, Terry, and Chris, I'm Brandon. We'll see you next time for another deep look with a deep root.